My son Gavin was standing at the head of my dining room table, in my own home, with my grandmother's china in the cabinet behind him, raising a glass of prosecco toward a room full of people I had never invited, when he said the words that changed everything between us. "Mom's already agreed," he said. "We just need to settle the timeline." I was standing in the doorway, between the kitchen and the dining room, holding a platter of lemon bars I had baked that morning. And for a long moment, I couldn't move. I had not agreed to anything. He said it with such confidence. That was what stopped me cold. Not the words themselves, but the ease of them, the way he smiled after, the way the people seated around my table nodded, as though they had expected exactly that. I looked at my daughter-in-law Priscilla, sitting at the far end in a silk blouse, already opening a leather portfolio. I looked at the two men I didn't recognize, both in jackets, both with manila folders on the table in front of them. I looked at my granddaughter Willa, 19 years old, sitting rigid in the corner chair near the window, with her hands folded in her lap, not nodding, not smiling. Willa was looking directly at me. That was the first moment I understood this was not a family dinner. And if you have ever walked into a room and realized, all at once, that every person in it had been given an agenda you knew nothing about, then you already know what I felt standing there with that platter going cold in my hands. If this story already has you wondering how far my son had gone, so was I. Please stay with me. 3 years before that afternoon, I buried my husband Robert Prescott on a Tuesday morning in October at Elmwood Cemetery in Charlotte. He had been my husband for 41 years, my business partner for 32, and the person who understood me better than anyone I have ever known. Robert and I had built Prescott Accounting Group from a 2-desk office in a converted house on Central Avenue. We started with small business clients, restaurants, a plumbing company, a dry cleaner who referred us to everyone she knew. Robert handled sales and client relationships. I handled the books, the filings, the compliance work, the staff. We learned as we went. We argued over money in our early years, the way most couples argue over money. Quietly, and with more fear than we admitted. And we got through it the same way most couples do, by trusting that the other person wasn't going anywhere. By the time we sold the firm, we had 23 employees, and a reputation that had taken 3 decades to build. The house on Meadowlark Drive was our reward for all of it. 4 bedrooms, a screened porch, and a backyard where Robert spent every Saturday of his retirement, trying to grow tomatoes that almost never came in right. He was a better accountant than a gardener, and we both knew it, and we both loved him for trying anyway. When Robert died of a heart attack at 68, the house became the loudest place I had ever lived. Not because it was noisy, because it wasn't. Gavin stepped into that silence almost immediately. He lived 40 minutes away in Mooresville, with Priscilla and Willa, and he started coming by more often, calling more, inserting himself into decisions I hadn't asked for help with. He walked through the house after a rainstorm and said he thought the gutters needed attention. He called my insurance company to ask a few questions and ended up on a 30-minute call I knew nothing about until I received a change I hadn't authorized. He asked whether he could add himself to my checking account, just in case of an emergency, he said. I told him I'd think about it. I didn't. The pattern is familiar to people who have lost a spouse. Others rush to fill the space, sometimes out of love, sometimes out of something else entirely. For the first year, I believed Gavin's intentions were exactly what he said they were. He was my only child. He was attentive and organized, qualities I had always admired about him. When my laptop stopped working, he drove 40 minutes to fix it. When the HVAC needed replacing, he appeared with 3 quotes and a recommendation before I had even called the first company. I was grateful for all of it. Somewhere in the 2nd year, the gratitude started curdling. Gavin began calling twice a week to check whether I had paid certain bills. He started showing up on weekday afternoons, walking through the house with the careful attention of a Mensen, cataloging an inventory. The crawl space, the water heater, the roofline from the backyard. When I mentioned I was thinking of having the kitchen cabinets refinished, he said he already knew a guy. And a week later, That guy was standing in my kitchen, giving me a quote I hadn't asked for on a job I still wasn't certain I wanted done. I mentioned this to my closest friend Shirley Odom, who had known Robert almost as long as I had. She pressed her lips together in the way she does when she has something to say, and is deciding whether to say it. Lou, she said. She has called me Lou since 1987. When someone keeps solving problems you didn't ask them to solve, it's worth asking why. I told her she was being uncharitable. 3 months later, I wasn't so sure. The invitation came on a Friday evening. Gavin called and said he and Priscilla wanted to host a small gathering at my house the following Saturday. A belated celebration, he called it. I had retired from the firm 6 months before Robert died, and in all the grief of the year after, nobody had marked the occasion. He wanted to do something thoughtful. A few people, some food, an afternoon to recognize 40 years of work. I told him it didn't need to be a big production. He said it wouldn't be. I should have asked more questions. I know that now. But at the time, my son was offering to do something kind, and I didn't want to be the kind of woman who interrogates kindness out of existence. Saturday came. Gavin and Priscilla arrived early to set things up, which I found a little unusual but didn't question. Shirley arrived at noon, when I had told her to come, and found me in the bedroom wearing the blue dress Robert had always liked, wondering why my house smelled like fresh flowers I hadn't bought. There are a lot of cars outside, Shirley said. There were 12 people in my living room when I walked in. Not 12 close friends. Not 12 colleagues from the firm. 12 people, several of whom I couldn't immediately place, seated in my chairs, at my table, with Prosecco poured and a cheese board set out on my kitchen island. Gavin was at the center of it, relaxed and easy, already performing for the room. Then he raised his glass and said it. Mom's already agreed. We just need to settle the timeline. I set the platter on the kitchen counter and walked to the table. Gavin turned to me with a wide, warm smile. Mom, you made it down. We were just getting started. I looked around the room. A woman I didn't know smiled at me. A man in a gray blazer shook my hand. Gavin introduced him as a financial advisor. He works with a lot of people in your situation, Gavin said, in the tone of someone who assumed that phrase would be reassuring. Another man across the table was a real estate specialist. The woman with the portfolio turned out to be someone named Caroline Webb, who sold residential property in the greater Charlotte area. What I did not see was anyone who had known Robert. What I did not see was anyone who had worked alongside me for 30 years. What I did not see, with the exception of Shirley and Willa, was anyone who actually knew me. Shirley was watching from her seat near the window. Her expression was careful. Willa had not moved. Gavin put his hand on my shoulder and steered me toward the chair beside him. To his left, not the seat at the head of the table where Robert and I had always sat. He had taken that seat himself. I sat down. I told myself it didn't matter. Then I watched Gavin answer 3 questions about me in the next 4 minutes, and I began to pay very close attention. The man in the gray blazer asked how I had been managing since retiring. Gavin answered before I could open my mouth. She's adjusting, he said. Honestly, it's been a lot. The house is more than she needs, and with Dad being gone, everything's more complicated. I turned toward him. I'm adjusting well, actually. Gavin laughed. Of course you are. She always says that. Caroline Webb asked about the house. Whether I had thought about what I might want to do with it long term. Again, Gavin answered. That's actually part of why we're here today. Once Mom sees the full picture, I think she's going to feel a lot better about where things are headed. I said very quietly, Gavin. He looked at me. What options? Something shifted in his expression, the tiniest recalibration behind his eyes. We'll get into the details in a bit. Let's just enjoy the afternoon first. I did not enjoy the afternoon. But I listened, the same way I used to listen to vendors overselling their services to our firm. With complete attention and no intention of saying yes. The documents came out 40 minutes later, after we had eaten, and the conversation had loosened into something that almost felt like a normal gathering, if you didn't look too closely at the folders still sitting on the table. Gavin stood, tapped the side of his Prosecco glass, and the room went quiet in the practiced way of people who had been waiting for this part. "So," he said, "the real reason we're all here." He slid a folder across the table toward me. Priscilla opened her portfolio. Caroline Webb straightened in her chair. "Mom, I know we've circled this for a while, and I know it's hard," he said. "But the house is a lot to manage alone. Property taxes, upkeep, all of it. We've done some research and we think right now is actually a strong moment to make a move. The market is good. Caroline has already pulled some comps." I looked at the documents in front of me. The top sheet was a listing authorization. My address was printed at the top. The estimated list price, $940,000, was typed in a box near the bottom. A specific number, not a range, a number. I looked at my son. "How did you arrive at this price?" He glanced at Caroline. "Comparable sales in the neighborhood." "Have you seen the current condition of the back deck? The study floors? The primary bath?" A pause. "We have a general sense." "From where?" Another pause. I opened the folder. Beneath the listing authorization were two more documents. The first was a financial management agreement authorizing Gavin to act on my behalf in all investment decisions. The second was a durable power of attorney. I read both of them. Gavin talked while I read. Something about precautions, about making things easier, about protection. I heard him the way you hear a radio in another room when you're trying to concentrate on something right in front of you. When I looked up, Shirley was no longer trying to hide her expression. "Gavin," I said, "who has been inside this house?" He blinked. "What?" "Someone gave you a listing estimate that accounts for the condition of specific rooms." "Who came in?" "Mom, that's not really. Who came inside my house?" The room had gone still. The financial advisor was examining the tablecloth. Caroline Webb had closed her folder. Then Willa spoke. She said it quietly, from the corner chair near the window, in the voice of someone who has been deciding for a long time whether to say something, and has finally decided. "Grandma," she said, "I need to tell you something." Gavin turned to her immediately. "Willa, don't." That was when I knew whatever she was about to say was the piece that made everything else fit. 3 weeks earlier, Willa told me, Caroline Webb had come to the house while I was at my book club. Gavin had let her in with his old key, the one I had given him years ago for emergencies, and walked her through every room. The primary bedroom, Robert's studies, the screened porch, the basement. Willa had been upstairs visiting for the week. She had heard them come in. She had listened through the floor. I sat with that for a moment. My son had brought a real estate agent into my home while I was out, without my knowledge, without my permission. He had used a key I gave him in trust. He had done it 3 weeks before organizing this gathering, before printing a listing price. I looked at Gavin, his jaw was tight. "You used my key," I said. "I was trying to get information to help you make an informed decision. You went through my house. Just the main rooms." "Just the main rooms," I repeated. Nobody spoke. I picked up my glass of iced tea. I had stopped accepting the Prosecco an hour ago, and I stood. "Excuse me," I said, "I need some air." The side porch was empty. I stood looking out at the backyard, at Robert's raised beds where the tomatoes had never grown the way he wanted them to. Then I opened my contacts and called Frank Delacourt. Frank had been our attorney for 22 years. He had helped Robert and me draft every estate document, negotiate the sale of the firm, and navigate every piece of complicated paperwork our lives had produced. He answered on the third ring. "Lucille," he said, "I was going to call you Monday." "Frank, I need to ask you something." A brief pause. He heard something in my voice. He has always been good at that. "Go ahead." I told him everything. The gathering, the people I didn't know, the listing authorization, the power of attorney, the financial management agreement, and Willa upstairs listening to my son walk a stranger through my home. When I finished, Frank was quiet for a moment. "Where are you right now?" "On my side porch." "Is anyone pressuring you physically?" "No." Then listen carefully, he said. Do not sign anything today. Not the listing agreement, not the PUA, not the financial management form, not your name on a birthday card while you're in that house. I wasn't planning to. Good. I could hear him shifting in his chair. Now I need to ask you something as your attorney. Is it possible Gavin genuinely believes he's acting in your best interest? I thought about the key in the lock and the real estate agent in Robert's study. He may have started there, I said. I don't think that's where he is now. Frank exhaled. What do you want to do about the estate plan? My plan had always been simple, because there had never been a reason to make it complicated. The house and the bulk of my retirement savings would go to Gavin. Willa's interests were tied to whatever Gavin chose to do afterward. At the time, it had felt like the natural shape of things. Standing on that porch, it felt like something else entirely. Frank and I talked for 20 minutes. I asked about trust structures. I asked about protecting Willa's portion independently, outside of any decisions Gavin might make later. I asked about timelines. Some of this we can initiate today, Frank said. But Lucille, I'm not going to let you make permanent changes to your estate plan in the middle of an emotional afternoon. We start the process now. We finalize it when I'm satisfied you're acting clearly and voluntarily. I've been acting clearly my entire adult life. I know you have. That's exactly why I want to protect it. A pause. Come by Monday morning. I'll have the framework ready. And between now and Monday, you go back inside, he said. You don't sign a single thing, and you let Gavin wonder. I went back inside. Gavin looked at me the way a man looks when he has decided a small storm has passed. There you are. You okay? I'm fine, I said. I sat back down. I folded my hands on the table. Now where were we? He relaxed slightly. He believed I had composed myself and returned ready to move forward. I understood that, because it was what he needed to believe. I let him explain the listing process. I let Caroline describe the timeline for preparing a home for market. I let the financial advisor talk about the benefits of liquidity and simplified management for someone at my stage of life. I listened to all of it, the way I once listened to vendors overselling their services, with complete attention and no intention of saying yes. When Gavin finally slid the folders back toward me and asked me to look at the signature pages, I looked at him for a long moment. No, I said. He blinked. No? I won't be signing any of this today. Mom, we've talked about all of this. You've talked about it, I said. I've listened. That's not fair. Gavin, you used your emergency key to bring a real estate agent into my home while I was out. You printed a listing price for a property I haven't agreed to sell. You brought a power of attorney document to a gathering you told me was a celebration. I kept my voice even. Please tell me which part of that is unfair. He looked at Priscilla. She looked at her portfolio. This is about protecting you, he said. From whom? He didn't answer. Caroline Webb quietly excused herself. The financial advisor found a reason to check his phone. One by one, the people Gavin had arranged in my living room began to understand that what they were witnessing was not going according to plan. Shirley stood, picked up the empty cheese board, and carried it to the kitchen without a word. She knew I didn't need rescuing. She knew I needed space. Monday morning, I went to Frank's office and we began. The changes took 3 weeks to complete properly. Frank reviewed every provision twice, walked me through each consequence, and made me explain back to him what I understood before he would let me initial anything. That is exactly the kind of attorney he is, and I have never been more grateful for it. Willa's inheritance was separated into its own trust, managed independently, outside of any structure that ran through Gavin. The charitable causes Robert had cared about were expanded. Gavin remained in the plan. I was clear with Frank on that point, and Frank didn't push me. But the direct access, the ability to move money in my name, to make decisions about my property, was gone. I also changed the locks that week. The locksmith was a quiet man named Russell, who didn't ask questions. When he handed me the new keys, I held them for a moment longer than necessary. Robert had given Gavin his first key to this house when Gavin was 22. "Bring your friends," Robert had told him. "This is your home too." 20 years later, I was standing at the front door holding a new brass key that had never been duplicated. And I understood that love and access are not the same thing. They never were. I also called my bank, called my investment firm, changed every password, reset every security question, removed Gavin's name from the emergency contact list at my doctor's office. Each of those things felt strange. Some made me cry. But privacy is not betrayal. I had to remind myself of that more than once. The truth about Gavin's finances came out 6 weeks later, not from Gavin, from Willa, who called on a Sunday afternoon and said she thought I deserved to know. Gavin's renovation company had taken on 3 large contracts over the past 2 years, and all 3 had gone wrong. A commercial build went over budget by $200,000. A residential development partnership stalled when the lead contractor declared bankruptcy. He and Priscilla had refinanced their home twice. By the time of the gathering at my house, they owed somewhere north of $500,000 across personal loans, business lines of credit, and a second mortgage. I stared at the window over the kitchen sink for a long time after Willa told me that. I asked if her parents knew she was calling. "No," she said. "Are you all right?" A pause. "I'm scared for them, but I'm more scared of what almost happened to you." That sentence stayed with me. When I called Gavin that evening, he didn't try to deny any of it. The confidence from the gathering was entirely gone. He sounded like a man who had not slept properly in a very long time. "I was going to ask you for help," he said. And then I convinced myself it would be easier if the decision felt like less of a request. "So, you arranged it so it wouldn't feel like my decision at all." A long silence. "Yes." I didn't shout. I wasn't angry, exactly. What I felt was the specific sadness of seeing someone you love clearly for the first time in a long while, and realizing you had been filling in the picture with things you hoped were true. "You used my age as the reason," I said. "You made it sound like I needed to be managed." "I know." "Did you actually believe that?" A pause that told me everything. No. The months that followed were quiet. Gavin didn't call much. I didn't press him to. Shirley came on Wednesdays. Willa visited when she could. I started volunteering at a financial literacy program for women at a community center nearby. Something a former colleague had started years ago that I had always meant to get involved with and never had. The women who came to those sessions were not so different from me. Some were widowed. Some were divorced. Some had simply never been in charge of their own finances and had reached a point where they needed to be. I helped them understand credit reports and retirement accounts and the difference between a will and a trust. It was the most useful I had felt since leaving the firm. I did not tell Gavin about it. I did not tell him much of anything for 4 months. Then a letter arrived. His handwriting on the envelope. I recognized it immediately. He has had the same slanted, slightly hurried cursive since high school. I stood at the mailbox for a while before I brought it inside. He wrote that he had spent 4 months being angry at me before he admitted to himself that what he was actually feeling was shame. He wrote about the moment his financial advisor sat him and Priscilla down and showed them exactly how far underwater they were. The number on paper, in black and white, with no way to soften it. He wrote that selling their house had been the hardest thing he had done since his father's funeral. And then he wrote something I hadn't expected. He wrote, "I keep thinking about walking into your home with a stranger and telling her which rooms had the most value. I keep thinking about Dad's study. I had no right to be in there." I read that paragraph 3 times. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking me to change anything I had changed. He was asking, very simply, if I would have coffee with him. We met at a small cafe near the community center on a Tuesday morning. Gavin was already there when I arrived. He looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him. He stood up when he saw me, and for a moment neither of us knew what to do with our hands. He didn't have a speech prepared, which I was glad about. He said he'd written 3 different versions of what he was going to say, and thrown all of them out, because every version started with an explanation, and an explanation was not what I needed. What he gave me instead was honesty, not the confessional kind that asks for immediate forgiveness, but the kind that sits quietly and waits. He told me he had looked at my house and seen a solution before he thought about what it meant to me. He said he had repeated it to himself often enough that he almost believed it was right. He told me about the night he and Priscilla sat in their nearly empty house after the sale closed, on lawn chairs, because the movers had already come, and Priscilla said to him, "Your mother built something. You were about to take it apart to fix something we built badly." He was looking at the table when he said that. "I'm not asking you to trust me again right away," he said. "I'm asking if there's a way to start." I held my tea and thought about what I actually wanted. Not what would resolve things fastest, what I actually wanted. "I'm not changing the estate plan back," I said. He nodded. "I know. Willa's portion stays where it is." "I think that's right," he said. And he meant it. By then, I could tell the difference between Gavin performing agreement and Gavin actually reaching it. I looked at him. My son, 43 years old, sitting across from me, with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time, and has just set it down. "You can call me," I said, "when you want to talk, not about the house, not about finances, just to talk." He pressed his lips together. "Okay." "And Gavin," he looked up, "next time you need help, you ask me. You don't arrange me." He nodded slowly. "I will." We finished our coffee. He hugged me when we left, the kind of hug that carries an apology inside it, and I let myself hold on a moment before I stepped back. That evening, I sat on the screened porch and listened to the neighborhood settle into quiet. The house was the same house it had always been. Same rooms, same floorboards, Robert's tools still hanging in the garage in the order he kept them. None of that had changed. What had changed was something harder to name. The certainty I used to carry that love was its own protection, that being a mother, being trusted, being needed, meant you were also safe from the people who needed you most. That certainty was gone. I didn't miss it. A thing that can be used against you isn't protection. It's exposure. If you have ever had someone mistake your trust for permission, I would genuinely love to know what you did. Because here is what I have learned. The moment you realize you have to protect yourself from someone you love is also the moment you understand exactly how much you have always protected them without knowing it. And deciding to stop is not betrayal. It is simply the other side of love, the side that says, "I care about you too much to pretend that this is acceptable." The maple in the backyard moved in the evening wind. My house, my screened porch, my life, still unfolding, still entirely mine to decide what to do with next.